I'm Callie Monroe, 25 years old. Until 3 months ago, I believed that family meant something sacred, that friendship was built on loyalty, and that the people who loved you would never betray you in the cruelest way imaginable. Then my 25th birthday changed everything. The image of my father walking out our front door with Eden, my Eden, who used to share my secrets and my bed during thunderstorms, still haunts every quiet moment. My father's last words to me that night still echo in my mind. Callie, sometimes love isn't enough to keep us where we think we belong. What he didn't know was that I had been planning to move back home after graduation to help keep our family together. I'd been secretly saving money for 3 years, turning down job offers in Boston, all to stay close to what I thought was unshakable. But how do you rebuild your life when the two people you trusted most become the architects of your destruction? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. I should probably start at the beginning, or at least somewhere that makes sense of how a life can shatter so completely in a single evening. 3 months before my 25th birthday, I was living what most people would call a charmed life in Millbrook, Vermont, a postcard-perfect town nestled between rolling hills and Lake Champlain, where autumn leaves reflected in still water, and everyone knew your name at the post office. Our house sat on Maple Street, a sprawling Victorian that my father had restored with his own hands back when I was 12. Richard Monroe, architect by trade and perfectionist by nature, had spent 3 summers transforming a crumbling 1890s relic into something that belonged in better homes and gardens. White clapboard siding, forest green shutters, a wraparound porch with hanging baskets of petunias that my mother tended with religious devotion. It was the kind of house that made people slow down when they drove past, the kind that whispered promises about the happy family living inside. And for 24 years, I believed those promises were true. My mother, Claire, moved through that house like a gentle ghost, always there when you needed her, but never demanding attention for herself. At 48, she still had the graceful posture of the dancer she'd once dreamed of becoming, though she'd traded point shoes for sensible flats and grand jetés for the quiet choreography of keeping a family running smoothly. She taught kindergarten at Millbrook Elementary, spending her days with 5-year-olds who adored her patient voice and her seemingly endless supply of animal stickers. In the evenings, she'd curl up in the window seat of our living room with a cup of chamomile tea and whatever novel the book club was reading that month, her reading glasses perched on her nose, completely content in her small, ordered world. Or, so I thought. Dad was different. All sharp angles where Mom was soft curves, all ambition where she was acceptance. At 51, he still had the lean build of the college basketball player he'd once been, though his dark hair had gone silver at the temples in a way that made him look distinguished rather than old. He ran Monroe Architecture from a converted barn behind our house, designing custom homes for wealthy families who wanted something special, something that would make their neighbors envious. His reputation stretched beyond Vermont. He'd been featured in Architectural Digest twice, and had clients who flew him to Martha's Vineyard and the Hamptons to consult on their summer retreats. Success suited him, maybe too well. I was the bridge between them, inheriting Mom's love of stories and Dad's need to build something lasting. After graduating from Middlebury College with a degree in creative writing, I'd moved back home while I figured out what came next. The plan was supposed to be temporary. 6 months to save money and decide between the editorial assistant job in Boston or the teaching position in Burlington. That was 18 months ago, and somehow temporary had become indefinite. Most days, I worked at Chapter and Verse, the independent bookstore on Main Street that had somehow survived the Amazon apocalypse by transforming into a community hub. We hosted author readings, writing workshops, and a Saturday morning story time that drew families from 3 towns over. The owner, Mrs. Hendricks, was 73 and had no interest in learning about social media marketing or online sales, which is where I came in. I managed the store's Instagram account, organized events, and spent my afternoons recommending books to customers who still believed that booksellers possess some kind of literary divination. It wasn't glamorous work, but it fed my soul in ways that sitting in a cubicle never could. Plus, it gave me time to write, or at least to pretend I was going to write. I'd started 17 different short stories in the past year, finishing exactly 3. The rejections from literary magazines were piling up in a manila folder that I kept hidden under my bed, along with my secret stash of chocolate and the diary I'd been keeping since I was 16. Eden Russell had been part of my life for so long that I couldn't remember a time before her. We'd met in Mrs. Patterson's second grade class when her family moved to Millbrook from somewhere in New York that she never talked about. She was small for her age, with white blonde hair that she wore in 2 tight braids and enormous blue eyes that made adults want to take care of her. I was drawn to her immediately, the way you're drawn to a wounded bird or a stray kitten, something fragile that needs protecting. Her home life was chaotic in ways that mine was stable. Her father had left before she turned 10, and her mother, Sandy, worked double shifts at the diner to keep their apartment above the hardware store. Eden spent more nights sleeping in my room than in her own, curled up on the trundle bed that Mom had bought specifically for her visits. She knew where we kept the extra toothbrushes, had her own drawer in my dresser, and a standing invitation to Sunday dinners that she rarely missed. My parents loved her. Dad would ruffle her hair and call her Little Bit, helping her with math, homework at the kitchen table while Mom packed extra cookies in both our lunchboxes. She was the daughter they'd never had a chance to have again after complications during my birth. And she soaked up their attention like a plant that had been kept too long in the dark. Looking back now, I wonder if I should have seen the warning signs. The way Eden's eyes would follow Dad when he moved through a room. How she always found excuses to help him with projects in his workshop, holding tools and asking questions about blueprints. The way she'd curl up next to him on the couch during movie nights, closer than necessary, her head finding its way to his shoulder while I was in the kitchen making popcorn. But she was 24 and he was 51. She was my best friend, and he was my father. The thought never crossed my mind because it was unthinkable. After high school, Eden had drifted through a series of jobs and a few semesters at the community college before dropping out to work full-time at the salon downtown. She was good with hair, had a natural instinct for what would flatter someone's face, but she was better at charming the clients with her laugh and her ability to make everyone feel like they were the most interesting person in the room. She rented a studio apartment above the pizza place, decorated it with fairy lights and thrift store furniture, and proclaimed herself happily independent. But independence looked different on Eden than it did on other people. She still showed up at our house for dinner at least twice a week, still called my mother when she was sick, still borrowed Dad's truck when her ancient Honda finally gave up for good. She was part of our family in every way except officially, and none of us questioned it because it had always been that way. The bookstore introduced me to Julian Fields on a rainy Tuesday in October, about 4 months before everything fell apart. He'd moved to Millbrook from Boston after what he vaguely described as needing a change, and Mrs. Hendricks hired him without checking references because, as she put it, anyone who can quote Tobias Wolff from memory is good people. Julian was quiet in a way that made you lean in closer, thoughtful in a way that made his occasional observations feel profound. He had the kind of face that was more interesting than handsome. Sharp cheekbones, serious dark eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, and a tendency to push his sleeves up when he was concentrating that revealed forearms marked with small scars he never explained. He shelved books with the same careful attention most people reserved for handling antiques, and he remembered every customer's preferences with an accuracy that bordered on supernatural. We worked together in comfortable silence most days, falling into an easy rhythm that didn't require constant conversation. But when we did talk, usually during the slow afternoon hours, our discussions ranged from the philosophical implications of Margaret Atwood's dystopias to whether the Red Sox had any hope of redemption that season. He was funny in an understated way, the kind of person who could make you laugh with a perfectly timed raised eyebrow or a dry observation about the customer who'd just spent 20 minutes looking for the blue book with the woman on the cover. Found myself looking forward to our shifts together, though I told myself it was purely professional camaraderie. Julian was safe, a friend who didn't want anything from me except good conversation, and someone to share the occasional eye roll when Mrs. Hendricks insisted we needed to rearrange the entire mystery section according to her latest organizational theory. My Aunt Nora, Mom's younger sister, would have called my attraction to Julian emotionally constipated, but Nora called most things emotionally constipated. She owned Bellamy Catering and had never met an opinion she couldn't express loudly or a problem she couldn't solve with either food or wine, depending on the severity of the situation. Twice divorced and proud of it, she lived in a converted farmhouse on the outskirts of town with 3 rescue dogs and a garden that produced enough vegetables to feed half the county. Nora was the person you called when you needed someone to tell you the truth without sugarcoating it, and she was the person you avoided when you weren't ready to hear that truth. She'd looked at my life choices with barely concealed impatience for months, pointing out that living at home and working retail wasn't exactly fulfilling my potential, and maybe I was using my comfort zone as an excuse to avoid taking real risks. She wasn't wrong, but she wasn't entirely right either. Millbrook felt safe in ways that Boston or Burlington didn't. Here, I knew which houses had been painted recently, and whose marriages were struggling, and where to find the best apple cider donuts. On a Sunday morning, I knew the rhythm of the seasons and the names of all the dogs that walked down Main Street, and exactly how to make Mrs. Hendricks laugh when she was having a bad day. Maybe it wasn't ambitious, but it was mine. The weekend before my birthday, I remember thinking that my life was exactly where it needed to be. I was saving money, writing a little, helping Mom plant her garden for spring, and slowly building something that might eventually become more than friendship with Julian. Dad had been working on a big project, a lake house for some family from New York, and he'd been distracted, but not unusually so. Mom had been quieter than normal, but I attributed that to the end-of-school-year stress that always hit teachers in May. Eden had been around more than usual, showing up for dinner uninvited and lingering afterward to help with dishes or watch TV. I should have questioned why she seemed reluctant to go home to her own apartment, why she kept checking her phone with a secretive smile, why she'd started wearing perfume to casual family dinners. But I didn't question any of it because these were the people I trusted most in the world. And it never occurred to me that trust could be weaponized. The morning of my 25th birthday dawned sunny and warm, the kind of perfect May day that makes you believe in possibilities. Mom made my favorite breakfast, blueberry pancakes with real maple syrup, and Dad gave me a card with a check for more money than I probably deserved. Eden showed up before I'd finished eating, carrying a gift bag and a smile that seemed brighter than usual. "Happy birthday, Callie girl," she said, using the nickname she'd given me in 4th grade. "Ready for the best day ever?" I believed her. God help me, I actually believed her. The party was Mom's idea, though she presented it as if it had been mine all along. "Just something small," she'd said a week earlier, folding laundry with the methodical precision she brought to everything. "Maybe a few people from the bookstore, Nora, Eden, of course. We could grill on the deck and make that chocolate cake you love." I'd agreed, because saying no to Mom's gentle suggestions felt impossible, and because turning 25 seemed like it should be marked somehow. A quarter-century of existence deserved acknowledgement, even if I wasn't entirely sure what I'd accomplished beyond mastering the art of living safely. By 6 o'clock, our backyard had been transformed into something from a magazine spread. Mom had strung white lights between the maple trees, set up the patio table with her good china, and arranged flowers from her garden in mason jars that caught the golden evening light. Dad manned the grill with his usual intensity, treating hamburgers and veggie patties like they were architectural projects requiring precise engineering. "Callie, come taste this marinade," he called, holding up a piece of chicken on a fork. I added rosemary this time. "What do you think?" I dutifully tasted and pronounced it perfect, though honestly, Dad's cooking always tasted the same to me. competent but lacking the warmth that Mom somehow infused into even the simplest meals. He smiled and ruffled my hair like I was still 10 years old, and for a moment, everything felt exactly as it should. Julian had arrived early, bearing a bottle of wine and a first edition of Flannery O'Connor stories that must have cost him a week's salary. "Mrs. Hendricks mentioned you were working on Southern Gothic short stories," he said, almost shyly. "Thought you might find this inspiring." The gift was thoughtful in a way that made my chest tight with something I wasn't ready to name. Julian paid attention to details that other people missed, remembered conversations from months ago, cared about my dreams without trying to fix or reshape them. I thanked him with a hug that lasted a beat longer than necessary, breathing in his scent of books and coffee and something clean like rain. Eden arrived fashionably late, as always carrying a gift bag adorned with so much tissue paper, it looked like a small explosion. She wore a sundress I'd never seen before, pale yellow with tiny white flowers, the kind of thing that made her look ethereal and young. Her hair fell in loose waves around her shoulders, and she'd done something different with her makeup that made her eyes seem larger, more luminous. Sorry, she said, kissing my cheek and pressing the gift bag into my hands. Had to close the salon, and Mrs. Patterson wanted me to touch up her roots at the last minute. You know how she gets about her church appearance. She moved through the small gathering like she belonged there more than anyone else, helping Mom carry platters from the kitchen, laughing at Nora's increasingly inappropriate stories about her dating life, complimenting Dad on his grilling technique with genuine enthusiasm. She was Eden at her most charming, the version of herself that had made adults love her since childhood. But something felt different. Maybe it was the way she kept checking her phone, or how her laugh seemed a little too bright, a little too performed. Maybe it was how she kept finding excuses to stand near Dad, offering to help him flip burgers, asking detailed questions about the architectural plans spread across the outdoor bar, touching his arm when she made a point. I told myself I was imagining things. Eden had always been affectionate, always drawn to father figures because her own had disappointed her so thoroughly. Dad was safe, stable, everything her biological father hadn't been. Of course she gravitated toward him. The evening progressed in the way of small-town gatherings, too much food, stories that had been told dozens of times before, the comfortable rhythm of people who'd known each other for years. Mrs. Hendricks regaled us with tales of difficult customers while Julian quietly refilled everyone's wine glasses. Nora held court near the flower beds, gesticulating wildly as she described her latest catering disaster involving a wedding cake and an overzealous ring-bearer. When it came time for presents, I felt the familiar discomfort of being the center of attention. I'd never been good at gracious receiving, preferring to fade into the background while other people took the spotlight. But Mom had made her chocolate cake, 3 layers with buttercream frosting and real vanilla beans, and everyone gathered around the patio table with the kind of expectant energy that makes refusing impossible. Julian's book was perfect, and I told him so while he ducked his head with characteristic modesty. Nora had given me a gift certificate for a weekend writing retreat in the Berkshires, along with a note that said, "Time to stop talking about being a writer and start being one." Mrs. Hendricks presented me with a vintage typewriter she'd found at an estate sale, convinced that I needed to experience the authentic writing process. Eden's gift was last, and she made a production of it, insisting I sit down while she retrieved the bag from where she'd hidden it behind Mom's rose bushes. "This one's special," she said, her eyes bright with something I couldn't quite identify. "I've been planning it for months." Inside the layers of tissue paper was a jewelry box, antique silver with intricate engravings around the edges. It was beautiful, far more expensive than anything Eden could reasonably afford on her salon salary. When I opened it, a tiny ballerina began to turn, while a delicate melody played. "It's Für Elise," Eden said. "Remember how your mom used to play that on the piano when we were little? I heard it in an antique shop in Burlington, and thought of all those nights when she'd play for us before bed. The gift was perfect and terrible all at once. thoughtful enough to bring tears to my eyes, expensive enough to make me uncomfortable, personal enough to feel like a claim on memories that belonged to all of us. I hugged her and thanked her, meaning it, while something nagged at the back of my mind. "Where did you really get the money for this?" I asked later, when we were alone in the kitchen loading the dishwasher. Eden's hand stilled on the plate she was rinsing. "I've been saving," she said without looking at me. "Sometimes you want to give the people you love something special." It was a reasonable answer, but something in her tone made me pause. Eden had never been good at saving money, never been the type to plan months ahead for anything. She lived paycheck to paycheck and borrowed $20 from me more often. Then she repaid it. A jewelry box that expensive represented weeks of careful budgeting, assuming she hadn't bought it on credit she couldn't afford. But before I could probe further, Dad appeared in the doorway with an armload of dirty plates. "Kitchen crew, reporting for duty," he said, with the forced joviality he brought to domestic tasks. "Can't let the birthday girl do all the work." The three of us fell into the familiar rhythm of cleaning up after a party. Dad scraping plates, Eden washing, me drying and putting away. It should have felt normal, comfortable, the way it had dozens of times before. Instead, I found myself watching them both with new awareness, noticing how Eden's fingers lingered when Dad handed her a dish, how his eyes followed her movements around the kitchen. I was being paranoid. I was reading meaning into innocent interactions, because I'd spent too many years analyzing literature and not enough time living in the real world. Eden was my best friend. Dad was my father. The idea forming in the back of my mind was ridiculous, impossible, the kind of thing that happened in soap operas and trashy novels, not in real life. The party wound down as the sun set over the lake, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold that would have been too perfect if they'd appeared in one of my stories. Mrs. Hendricks was the first to leave, claiming she needed to get home to her cats. Nora followed, after hugging me hard enough to crack ribs and whispering, "Call me if you need anything. Anything at all." Julian lingered on the front porch, seemingly reluctant to end the evening. "Thank you for including me," he said, hands shoved deep in his pockets. It's been a long time since I felt part of something like this. There was loneliness in his voice that made me want to ask questions I didn't have the right to ask yet. Instead, I touched his arm gently. "Thank you for the book and for being here." He smiled, the kind of smile that reached his eyes and made something flutter in my chest. "Happy birthday, Callie. I hope 25 is everything you want it to be. If only I'd known what I wanted, or what I was about to lose." After Julian left, the four of us, Mom, Dad, Eden, and I, sat on the front porch drinking the last of the wine and watching fireflies begin their nightly dance. It felt like countless other evenings we'd shared, the comfortable silence of people who didn't need to fill every moment with conversation. Mom excused herself first, claiming exhaustion though it was barely 9 o'clock. "Don't stay up too late," she said, kissing the top of my head. "Some of us have to work tomorrow." I should have noticed how tired she looked, how her smile didn't quite reach her eyes. I should have seen the way she paused in the doorway, looking back at Dad with an expression I couldn't quite read. But I was 25 and self-absorbed and thinking about Julian's smile, so I missed all the signs that my mother already knew what was coming. Eden curled up in the wicker chair next to mine, tucking her feet under her like she always did. "Best birthday ever?" she asked, the question carrying weight I didn't understand yet. "Pretty close," I admitted. "Thanks for the music box. It's beautiful." "I wanted to give you something that would last," she said. And again there was something in her tone that made me look at her more closely. "Something you'd remember." Dad had been quiet during the cleanup, distracted in a way that was becoming more common lately. Now he sat on the porch railing, looking out at the street rather than at us. His phone buzzed, and he glanced at it with an expression I'd never seen before. Guilty, excited, secretive. "I should probably head home," Eden said, though she made no move to get up. "Early day tomorrow. Stay as long as you want." Dad said, finally looking at her. "You know you're always welcome here." The way he said it made something cold settle in my stomach. There was warmth in his voice when he spoke to Eden, a tenderness that seemed different from the casual affection he'd always shown her. When had that changed? How long had I been missing the signs? Eden's phone buzzed, and she checked it with a small smile. "Actually, I should go," she said, standing and smoothing down her dress. "Callie, walk me to my car?" I followed her down the front path, grateful for the excuse to move, to shake off the weird tension that had settled over the evening. Eden's Honda was parked under the streetlight, and she turned to hug me goodbye. "Thank you for including me. Tonight," she said, holding on longer than usual. "Your family means everything to me. You know that, right?" "Of course," I said, though something in her words felt like a goodbye that went deeper than the end of an evening. She got in her car and drove away, and I stood on the sidewalk watching her taillights disappear down Maple Street. When I turned back toward the house, Dad was still sitting on the porch, but now he was on his phone, speaking in low tones I couldn't quite make out. "Can't keep doing this." I caught as I climbed the front steps. "Have to tell her soon." Not fair to any of us. He saw me and ended the call abruptly, shoving the phone into his pocket with movements that were too quick, too defensive. "Work call," he said, not meeting my eyes. "You know how clients are. No respect for personal time." I nodded and wished him good night. But as I climbed the stairs to my room, I couldn't shake the feeling that everything had just changed in ways I couldn't yet understand. The evening that had started with such promise now felt heavy with secrets and unspoken truths. In my room, I sat on the edge of my bed holding Eden's music box, winding the key and watching the tiny ballerina spin while Für Elise played its haunting melody. The tune that had once meant comfort in childhood now sounded like a warning, though I couldn't have said why. I was still sitting there, lost in thought, when I heard Dad's car start in the driveway. It was almost 10 o'clock, late for him, to be going anywhere, especially on a weeknight. I went to my window and watched him back out of the driveway and drive in the same direction Eden had gone 20 minutes earlier. That's when I knew, though I wouldn't admit it to myself for another 3 hours. That's when the foundations of my carefully constructed world began to crack. Though the collapse wouldn't come until I heard his voice through the thin walls of Eden's apartment, saying words that would haunt me for months to come. Telling and preparing this story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. I followed him. God help me. I got in my car and followed my own father through the quiet streets of Millbrook like some kind of detective in a bad movie. Even now, 3 months later, I can't fully explain what drove me to do it. Maybe it was the way he'd ended that phone call so abruptly, or how Eden's goodbye had felt so final, or the sick certainty that was growing in my stomach like a tumor. Eden's apartment was only 6 blocks away, above Marcello's Pizza on the corner of Main and Elm. I'd been there hundreds of times over the years, sleepovers that turned into philosophical discussions about our futures, movie marathons fueled by too much wine and takeout Chinese food, countless ordinary moments that now felt tainted by what I was about to discover. Dad's car was parked in the alley behind the building, tucked between the dumpster and Eden's ancient Honda like he was trying to hide it. I sat in my own car at the end of the block, hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles had gone white, trying to convince myself there was an innocent explanation for why my father was visiting my best friend at 10 o'clock on a Tuesday night. Maybe Eden was having car trouble again. Maybe she'd called him for help with something in her apartment, a leaky faucet or a stuck window. Dad was the kind of man who fixed things, who couldn't resist solving other people's problems even when they hadn't asked for his help. There were a dozen reasonable explanations that didn't involve the unthinkable, but reasonable explanations don't require hiding your car in an alley. I waited 20 minutes before I saw him emerge from the back entrance of the building, moving, with the careful steps of someone trying not to be seen. Even in the dim light from the street lamps, I could see that his shirt was wrinkled, his hair mussed in a way that suggested hands other than his own had been running through it. The drive home felt like it took hours, though it couldn't have been more than 5 minutes. I kept hoping I'd misunderstood what I'd seen, that there was still some innocent explanation that would make sense of everything. But the sick feeling in my stomach had solidified into something cold and hard and undeniable. I was sitting on my bed, still fully dressed, when I heard Dad's car pull into the driveway 45 minutes later. Through my bedroom window, I watched him sit in the driver's seat for a long moment before finally getting out and walking to the house with the measured steps of a man trying to appear normal. The front door closed with its familiar creak, followed by the sound of Dad's footsteps on the stairs. He paused outside my room. I could see his shadow in the crack under my door, but he didn't knock. After a moment, I heard him continue down the hall to his and Mom's bedroom. I lay awake until dawn, staring at the ceiling and trying to process what I'd witnessed. Every innocent explanation I constructed crumbled under the weight of what I'd seen. Dad's guilty expression, the hidden car, the way he'd touched his hair afterward like he was trying to erase evidence of someone else's fingers. By morning, I'd convinced myself that I was overreacting, that my writer's imagination was creating drama where none existed. Dad and Eden had been close for years. Maybe they were planning something for Mom's upcoming birthday, or discussing Eden's latest relationship drama, or any number of normal interactions that might require privacy. But when I came downstairs, for breakfast, Mom was sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee that had clearly gone cold hours ago, staring out the window at her garden with an expression I'd never seen before. She looked smaller somehow, like she'd collapsed in on herself during the night. "Morning, Mom," I said, trying to inject normalcy into my voice. "You're up early." She turned to look at me, and I saw that her eyes were red-rimmed, though whether from crying or lack of sleep, I couldn't tell. "Couldn't sleep," she said simply. "Your father had to leave early for a client meeting." It was barely 7 a.m., early even for Dad's most demanding clients. "Which project?" I asked, settling into the chair across from her with my own cup of coffee. Mom's pause was barely perceptible, but I caught it. "The lake house," she said. "You know how he gets when he's close to finishing something important." I did know, but this felt different. Dad's usual pre-completion intensity was focused and energetic, driven by his need to perfect every detail. This morning's early departure felt more like an escape. "Did you sleep at all?" I asked, studying her face for clues I didn't want to find. "A little." She reached across the table and squeezed my hand, her fingers cold despite the warm coffee mug she'd been holding. "I hope you had a good birthday, sweetheart. I know it wasn't as exciting as some of your friends' celebrations, but—" "Mom, it was perfect," I interrupted, meaning it despite everything that had happened afterward. "The best birthday I've had in years." She smiled, but it didn't reach. Her eyes. "Good. That's good." We sat in comfortable silence for a few minutes, watching the morning light filter through the kitchen curtains. This had always been our favorite time of day, the quiet hour before the world demanded our attention, when we could just exist together without needing to fill the space with conversation. But this morning, the silence felt fragile, like it was hiding secrets neither of us was ready to voice. I spent the day at chapter and verse trying to lose myself in the familiar routine of shelving books and helping customers, but everything felt off-kilter, like I was watching my life through slightly warped glass. Julian noticed immediately. He had that uncanny ability to read people's moods without being told what was wrong. "Rough night?" he asked during the mid-morning lull, when we were both sorting through a box of new releases that had arrived that week. "Birthday hangovers are the worst," I said, attempting lightness. "All that forced celebration." He looked at me more closely, and I realized that Julian was probably the only person in my life who wouldn't automatically accept my deflection. He paid attention to details, to the spaces between words, to the things people didn't say as much as what they did. "Want to talk about it?" he asked, setting down the book he'd been cataloging. The simple question nearly undid me. I wanted to tell him everything. About Dad's secretive phone call, about following him to Eden's apartment, about the sick certainty that was growing in my chest like a cancer. But how do you voice suspicions that feel too horrible to be true? "Just family stuff," I said instead. "You know how it is." Julian nodded, though I suspected he didn't entirely believe me. His own family history was something he kept carefully private, but I'd gleaned enough from throwaway comments to know that his relationship with his parents was complicated at best. He understood the weight that family secrets could carry. "Well, if you want to talk about family stuff, or anything else, I'm a good listener," he said, returning to his cataloging with the kind of casual attention that let me know the offer was genuine but not pushy. It was exactly what I needed to hear, even if I wasn't ready to take him up on it yet. The day dragged on with excruciating slowness. Every time the bell above the door chimed, I looked up expecting to see Eden walk in with her usual bright smile and some excuse for why she needed to borrow something or share some piece of gossip. But she didn't come, which was unusual for a Wednesday. Eden almost always stopped by the bookstore on Wednesdays, claiming she needed reading material for her lunch breaks, but really just wanting company. By closing time, I'd worked myself into a state of anxious certainty that something was terribly wrong. The Eden I knew wouldn't disappear without explanation, especially not the day after my birthday, unless she had reasons for avoiding me that I didn't want to consider. I drove home through downtown Millbrook, past the familiar landmarks that had anchored my entire life. The white steepled church where I'd been baptized, the elementary school where Mom still taught kindergarten, the park where Eden and I had spent countless summer afternoons on the swings, sharing secrets and dreams that seemed so innocent now. Dad's car was in the driveway when I got home, but the house felt empty in a way that had nothing to do with whether people were physically present. I found Mom in her garden, deadheading roses with movements that seemed more aggressive than necessary. "Where's Dad?" I asked, settling onto the wooden bench he'd built for her last Mother's Day. "Inside, making calls." Her voice was carefully neutral, but I caught the tightness around her eyes. The lake house project is apparently more complicated than he anticipated. Something in her tone made me look at her more closely. "Mom, is everything okay? Between you and Dad, I mean?" She paused in her pruning, garden shears poised over a wilted bloom. For a moment, I thought she might actually tell me what was wrong, might give voice to whatever was causing the shadows under her eyes and the careful way she'd been speaking about Dad. Instead, she forced a smile and returned to her roses. "Of course, sweetheart. Just the usual stresses of a long marriage. Nothing you need to worry about." But I was worrying, because the pieces were starting to fit together in ways that made my stomach clench. Dad's secretive behavior, Eden's expensive gift and emotional goodbye, Mom's careful neutrality when she mentioned Dad's work schedule. The pattern was becoming clearer, even though I desperately wanted to be wrong. Dinner that night was a masterclass in polite tension. Dad sat at his usual place at the head of our kitchen table, discussing his day with the kind of detailed enthusiasm he usually reserved for projects he was genuinely excited about. But there was something performative about it, like he was trying. Too hard to convince us, or maybe himself, that everything was normal. "The clients want to add a second deck," he said, cutting his chicken with more precision than necessary, "which means redoing half the foundation work. But that's the nature of custom architecture. People don't know what they want until they see what they don't want." Mom made appropriate listening noises while pushing food around her plate without actually eating much. I found myself studying both of them, looking for clues to confirm or deny the suspicions that were eating me alive. "How was Eden today?" I asked, trying to sound casual. I expected her to stop by the bookstore, but she never showed up. Dad's fork paused halfway to his mouth, just for a second, but I caught it. "I wouldn't know," he said. Why would I know Eden's schedule? The defensiveness in his voice was answer enough. After dinner, I offered to help with dishes, hoping for another chance to observe Dad's behavior, but he disappeared into his office almost immediately, claiming he had blueprints to review. Through the thin walls of our old house, I could hear him on the phone again, speaking in the same low tones I'd overheard the night before. I was loading the dishwasher when my phone buzzed with a text from Eden. Can we talk tomorrow? There's something I need to tell you. My hands shook as I typed back. Of course. Everything okay? Her response took several minutes. It will be. Meet me at our spot by the lake after you get off work? Our spot was the old dock behind the elementary school, where we'd spent countless afternoons as teenagers talking about boys and dreams and all the ways we'd change the world when we grew up. It was where Eden had told me about her first kiss, where I'd confessed my crush on Tommy Morrison in 11th grade, where we'd promised to be each other's maid of honor when we eventually got married. Now it felt like the place where everything would finally be confirmed. That night, I couldn't sleep again. I lay in bed listening to the familiar sounds of our house settling, trying to prepare myself for whatever Eden was going to tell me. Part of me still hoped I was wrong, that there was some other explanation for the guilty looks and secretive phone calls and the way Dad had been avoiding my eyes all evening. But a larger part of me knew that my childhood was about to officially end, that the safe world I'd been living in was built on foundations that were already crumbling. The girl who had braided my hair and shared my secrets and slept in my bed during thunderstorms was about to break my heart in the most unforgivable way possible. Around 2 a.m., I heard Dad get up and go downstairs. Through my bedroom window, I watched him pace the backyard in his pajamas and bare feet, talking on his phone like a man trying to solve an impossible problem. The conversation lasted nearly an hour, and when he finally came back inside, I heard him go to the guest room, instead of back to his and Mom's bedroom. That's when I knew for certain that Mom already suspected what I was just beginning to understand. That's when I realized she'd been protecting me from the truth for longer than I'd been avoiding it myself. The next morning, Mom was already gone when I came downstairs, unusual for a Thursday, when she didn't have to be at school until 8. Dad was in the kitchen drinking coffee and staring at his phone with an expression I couldn't read. Mom had early meetings, he said, without looking up. Something about curriculum planning. It was May. Curriculum planning happened in August, and Dad knew it. The fact that he was lying so casually, so obviously, made something twist in my chest. Dad, I said, settling into the chair across from him. Is everything okay? You seem distracted lately. For a moment his mask slipped, and I saw something raw and desperate in his eyes. Callie, sometimes life gets complicated in ways you don't expect. Sometimes people have to make choices that hurt the people they love. What kind of choices? He looked at me for a long moment, and I thought he might actually tell me the truth. Instead, he stood up and kissed the top of my head with the kind of desperate affection that felt like goodbye. Nothing you need to worry about, sweetheart. I love you. Remember that, okay? No matter what happens, I love you. And then he left, for work, taking his secrets with him, and leaving me alone with the terrible certainty that my world was about to change forever. The day passed with the surreal quality of a dream, where everything looks normal but feels fundamentally wrong. At chapter and verse, I went through the motions of my job, helping customers find books, processing returns, updating the inventory spreadsheet, while my mind churned through possibilities I didn't want to consider. Julian noticed my distraction almost immediately. During our lunch break, when I'd barely touched the sandwich I'd brought from home, he sat down across from me in the small break room behind the store. Callie, he said gently, whatever's going on, you don't have to carry it alone. The kindness in his voice nearly broke me. I'd been holding myself together through sheer willpower, but Julian's offer of support made me realize how desperately I needed someone to talk to. someone who wasn't part of the tangled web of relationships that seemed to be unraveling around me. "My family is falling apart," I said, the words tumbling out before I could stop them. "I think my dad is having an affair." Julian's expression didn't change, but I saw something flicker in his eyes. Not surprise exactly, but recognition. Like he'd seen this kind of devastation before. "What makes you think that?" he asked, his voice carefully neutral. I told him everything. Dad's secretive phone calls, the late-night visit to Eden's apartment, Mom's obvious distress, the way everyone was pretending everything was normal while the house filled with unspoken tension. Julian listened without interrupting, without offering easy solutions or false reassurances. "I'm supposed to meet Eden tonight," I finished. "She says she has something important to tell me. I think she's going to confirm what I already know." Julian was quiet for a long moment, turning his coffee mug in slow circles on the small table between us. "How long have you suspected?" he asked finally, consciously. "Since Tuesday night?" But looking back, I paused, thinking about all the small signs I'd dismissed. Maybe I've been avoiding the truth for longer than I want to admit. "That's normal," he said. "When the people we trust most are the ones betraying us, our minds try to protect us by finding other explanations. It's survival." There was something in his tone that made me look at him more closely. "You sound like you speak from experience." Julian's smile was rueful. "My father had an affair when I was in college. With my mother's best friend, actually. The woman who'd been like an aunt to me growing up." He shook his head. "It destroys more than just the marriage. It makes you question everything you thought you knew about love and loyalty, and whether anyone can really be trusted. How did you get through it?" "Badly, at first. I dropped out of school for a semester, made some spectacularly poor decisions, generally tried to self-destruct, rather than deal with the pain." He met my eyes. But eventually I realized that their choices didn't have to define my capacity for trust. It took time and therapy and a lot of hard conversations with myself about what I actually had control over. "Did your parents stay together?" "No. Mom tried for about 6 months, but the trust was gone. Dad married the other woman, and they moved to Florida. I haven't spoken to him in 3 years. The casual way he said it made my chest tight. "Do you regret cutting him off?" Julian considered this. "Sometimes. But I regret the years I spent trying to maintain a relationship with someone who never showed genuine remorse for the pain he caused. Some betrayals are too fundamental to forgive, at least not in the way people expect." His honesty was both terrifying and comforting. Part of me wanted him to tell me that everything would work out, that families could survive anything if they tried hard enough. But a larger part was grateful for his refusal to minimize what I was facing. "What about your mom?" I asked. "She's doing well now. Remarried a few years ago to a man who actually deserves her. It took her a long time to trust again, but she's happier than I've seen her since I was a kid." He reached across the table and squeezed my hand briefly. "People can heal from this, Callie. It's not easy, and it's not quick, but it's possible." The afternoon crawled by with excruciating slowness. Every time the door chimed, I expected to see Dad walk in with some fabricated excuse for why he needed to talk to me. Or Eden, with her bright smile and casual lies about why she'd been avoiding me. But neither appeared, which somehow made everything worse. At 4:30, Mrs. Hendricks shooed me out early, claiming business was slow, and I looked like I needed air. "Go on," she said, waving away my protests. "Some conversations can't wait for closing time." I drove to the elementary school through streets that had been familiar my entire life, but now felt like foreign territory. The school grounds were empty, except for a few maintenance workers and the usual collection of stray cats that lived behind the cafeteria. The path to the lake was overgrown with spring weeds, but my feet found the way automatically. I'd walked this route hundreds of times over the years. The old dock stretched about 20 feet into the water, its weathered boards soft with age and countless seasons of rain and sun. Eden was already there, sitting at the very end with her feet dangling in the water. She'd changed from whatever she'd worn to work into jeans and a soft blue sweater that made her look younger, more vulnerable. "Hi," she said when she heard my footsteps on the dock. She didn't turn around. "Hi yourself." I sat down beside her, close enough to touch but not touching. The water was surprisingly warm for May, and tiny fish darted between the dock supports in flashes of silver. We sat in silence for several minutes, both of us staring out at the lake. This spot had always been our sanctuary, the place we came when we needed to escape the complications of growing up. Now it felt like a confessional. "I've been trying to figure out how to tell you this for weeks," Eden said finally. "There's no good way to say it. No version that doesn't make me sound like a terrible person. Just say it," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. She took a shaky breath. "I'm in love with your father, and he's in love with me." Even though I'd known it was coming, hearing the words spoken aloud felt like being punched in the stomach. The confirmation made it real in a way that my suspicions hadn't. "How long?" I asked. "Since March." "But Callie, the feelings have been there longer. On both sides." She finally turned to look at me, and I saw that she'd been crying. "I know how this sounds. I know what you must think of me." "I don't know what I think yet," I said honestly. "I'm still trying to process the fact that my best friend and my father have been lying to me for months." "We never meant for it to happen," she said, the words tumbling out in a rush. "I came to him for advice about some things, and we started talking more, and somewhere along the way it became something else. Something neither of us expected." "What kind of advice?" I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know. Eden's laugh was bitter. "Life advice, career advice, how to be an adult when you feel like you're still a scared kid pretending to know what you're doing." She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. "He understood things about me that no one else ever has. He saw who I could be instead of just who I've been." "And Mom? What about her in all of this?" "Your father hasn't been happy for a long time, Callie. The marriage has been over in everything but name for years." "That's bullshit," I said, anger finally breaking through the numbness. "That's the same thing every cheating spouse says to justify their behavior. We weren't happy anyway. The marriage was already dead. It's a convenient lie that makes you feel better about destroying someone else's life." Eden flinched as if I'd slapped her. "It's not a lie. Ask your mother. Really ask her. When's the last time she and your father did anything together besides exist in the same house? When's the last time you saw them actually connect as anything more than co-parents and roommates?" The question hit harder than I wanted to admit because I couldn't remember. Mom and Dad had always seemed stable to me, but stable wasn't the same as happy. When had I stopped seeing them as individuals with their own needs and desires and started seeing them only as my parents, frozen in roles that might not have been fulfilling them? "Even if that's true," I said, "there are ways to handle unhappy marriages that don't involve betraying everyone who trusts you. Counseling, honest conversations, divorce if it comes to that. But not this. Not sneaking around and lying and manipulating people who love you." "You're right," Eden said quietly. "We handled it badly. We were cowards who took the easy path instead of the honest one. But Callie, the feelings are real. What we have together, it's not just some midlife crisis or rebellion. It's love. Complicated, messy, badly timed love, but love nonetheless." "Don't," I said, standing up so quickly that the dock swayed under our feet. "Don't try to romanticize this. Don't make it sound like some beautiful love story that justifies the destruction you've caused." Eden stood too, reaching for my arm. "Callie, please. You're my best friend. You're the closest thing to a sister I've ever had. I can't lose you over this." I pulled away from her touch. You already have. The moment you decided my father was worth more to you than I was. That's not how it happened. That's exactly how it happened. The words came out louder than I'd intended, echoing across the empty lake. You chose him over me. Over our friendship. Over everything we've been to each other since we were 7 years old. Eden was crying in earnest now, mascara streaking down her cheeks. I never wanted to hurt you. I never wanted any of this to happen, but you did want him, I said. More than you wanted to preserve what we had. More than you wanted to respect my family. More than you wanted to be the person I thought you were. The silence stretched between us, filled with the sound of water lapping against the dock supports and the distant call of a loon somewhere across the lake. We'd shared so many secrets at this spot over the years, but this one felt different, final. What happens now? Eden asked, her voice small. I don't know, I said honestly. I need time to figure out how to exist in a world where the two people I trusted most have become strangers. Your father wants to tell you himself. He's planning to talk to you and your mother this weekend. The thought of Dad sitting us down for some kind of family meeting made my stomach churn. He's going to leave her, isn't he? Eden nodded, unable to meet my eyes. He says he can't keep living a lie, that all of us deserve better than this half-life he's been existing in. All of us, I repeated. How considerate of him to include Mom and me in his grand plan for authentic living. Callie, don't. I started walking back toward shore, needing to put distance between us before I said something that couldn't be taken back. Just don't. I need to go home and pretend everything is normal until Dad decides to blow up our lives officially. Will you call me? Eden asked, her voice barely audible over the evening sounds of the lake. After you've had time to process all this? I turned back to look at her one last time. My childhood friend, my confidant, the girl who'd shared my bed during thunderstorms and knew all my secrets. She looked small and lost sitting on the end of that dock. And for a moment, I felt a flicker of the protective instinct that had defined our relationship for so many years. But then I remembered the jewelry box, the expensive gift that now felt like payment for services rendered. I remembered the way she'd watched Dad during the birthday party, the secretive smiles and careful touches that I'd dismissed as innocent affection. I don't know, I said. Right now, I don't know anything. The drive home passed in a blur of familiar streets and racing thoughts. I felt hollowed out, like someone had scooped out everything essential and left only an empty shell that looked like Callie Monroe, but contained nothing recognizable. Dad's car was in the driveway, but Mom's wasn't unusual for a Thursday evening. I found a note on the kitchen counter in her careful handwriting. Gone to Nora's for dinner. Leftovers in the fridge. Love you. Dad was in his office, door closed, speaking in the low tones that had become his signature sound over the past few weeks. I could hear the cadence of his voice, but not the words, which was probably for the best. I'd heard enough truth for one day. In my room, I sat on my bed surrounded by the artifacts of a childhood that suddenly felt ancient. Stuffed animals from elementary school, books I'd read dozens of times, the music box Eden had given me for my birthday that now seemed like evidence of a crime I hadn't yet understood. I opened the music box and watched the tiny ballerina spin while For Elise played its haunting melody. The tune that had once meant comfort and family now sounded like a funeral dirge for everything I'd believed about love and loyalty and the people who were supposed to protect you from harm. My phone buzzed with a text from Julian. How did it go? I stared at the message for a long time before typing back. As bad as I expected. Maybe worse. His response came immediately. Do you want to talk? I could come over, or we could meet somewhere. The offer was tempting. Julian's calm presence and honest perspective felt like exactly what I needed. But I also knew that involving him more deeply in my family's destruction wasn't fair to either of us. Tomorrow, I typed. I need tonight to sit with this. Okay. But Callie, you don't have to sit with it alone if you don't want to. I set the phone aside and lay back on my bed, staring at the ceiling that had looked the same my entire life. Everything in this room was familiar. The crack in the plaster near the window, the way the afternoon light fell across my desk, the sound of Mom's footsteps on the stairs when she came to say goodnight. But familiarity wasn't the same as safety. I was learning that the hard way. Around 9 o'clock, I heard Mom come home. Her footsteps in the hallway were slower than usual, and when she knocked on my door, her voice sounded tired in a way that went deeper than physical exhaustion. Callie, can I come in? I sat up as she entered, taking in her carefully composed expression and the way she held herself like someone trying not to break apart. How was dinner with Nora? I asked. Educational, she said, settling into the chair at my desk. Your aunt has strong opinions about marriage and what people owe each other in terms of honesty. The way she said it made me wonder how much Mom already knew, how long she'd been carrying her own suspicions while trying to protect me from the truth. Mom, I said carefully. Are you okay? Really okay? She was quiet for a long moment, studying her hands in her lap. I've been better, she said finally, but I've also been worse. Right now, I'm just trying to take things one day at a time. Is there anything I can do? She looked up at me then, and I saw something fierce and determined in her eyes that I'd never noticed before. You can stop worrying about me and focus on taking care of yourself. Whatever happens in the next few weeks, I need you to know that you are not responsible for fixing this family or managing anyone else's emotions. The words felt like permission I hadn't known I needed. Does that include Dad? Especially Dad, she said firmly. Your father is an adult who made adult choices. The consequences of those choices are his to handle, not yours. She stood to leave, then paused in the doorway. Callie? I found something in the attic today that I'd forgotten about. Would you like to see it? Curiosity overrode my emotional exhaustion. I followed her upstairs to the narrow pull-down ladder that led to our attic, a space I hadn't been in since I was a child playing hide-and-seek. Mom climbed up first, then helped me navigate the cramped space between the rafters and stored holiday decorations. In the far corner, illuminated by a bare bulb, was a stack of canvases and sketch pads that I'd never seen before. Mom pulled out a canvas that had been turned face inward against the wall and held it up for me to see. It was a painting of our lake, but not the sanitized postcard version that appeared on tourist brochures. This was the lake as it really was, wild and moody, with storm clouds gathering over water that reflected both beauty and danger. The brushwork was confident and expressive, full of emotion and technical skill that took my breath away. Mom, I whispered. You painted this? She nodded, pulling out another canvas. This one a portrait of me as a child, captured with such loving detail that I felt tears prick my eyes. I used to paint, before you were born, and for a few years after. I was actually pretty good at it. These are incredible. Why did you stop? Mom's smile was sad, but not bitter. Life happened. Marriage, motherhood, teaching. There never seemed to be time for both the practical responsibilities and the creative dreams. I chose practicality. We spent an hour going through her hidden portfolio. Landscapes and portraits and abstract pieces that revealed a side of my mother I'd never known existed. She'd been an artist, a real artist, with talent that could have taken her places if she'd chosen to pursue it. Why are you showing me this now? I asked as we climbed back down from the attic. Because, she said, carefully folding the ladder back into place, I want you to see that people are more complicated than the roles they play in our lives. I'm not just your mother or your father's wife. I'm a person with my own dreams and disappointments and possibilities. Back in my room, I lay awake thinking about Mom's hidden art, and Eden's confession, and Dad's carefully constructed lies. I thought about Julian's story of his own family's destruction, and his hard-won wisdom about trust and forgiveness. But mostly I thought about the tiny ballerina in Eden's music box, spinning endlessly to the same haunting melody, trapped in a performance that never changed and never ended. I wondered if that's what my family had become. Performers trapped in roles that no longer fit, going through the motions of love and loyalty while the music played on. Tomorrow, Dad would tell us what Eden had already revealed. Tomorrow our family would officially shatter into pieces that might never fit back together. Tonight, I was still Callie Monroe, beloved daughter and trusting friend, living in a house where people still pretended to love each other the way they always had. I fell asleep to the sound of my parents' voices in the room next door, not arguing, just talking in the careful tones of people trying to navigate a minefield without setting off any explosions. In the morning, I knew the explosions would come whether we were careful or not. The call came at 6:30 the next morning, jarring me awake from dreams filled with spinning ballerinas and sinking boats. My phone buzzed against the nightstand, with an unfamiliar number, and something about the early hour made me answer despite my policy of avoiding unknown callers. "Is this Callie Monroe?" The voice was female, professional, with the kind of careful neutrality that suggested bad news. "Yes," I said, instantly alert. "Who is this?" "This is Dr. Sarah Chen from Mercy General Hospital. I have Eden Russell here, as a patient, and you're listed as her emergency contact. She's asking for you." The world tilted sideways. What happened? Is she okay? She's stable now, but she was brought in last night after a situation. She's asking to see you before we can proceed with her treatment plan. Would you be able to come in this morning? I was already reaching for clothes with my free hand. "I'll be there in 20 minutes. The drive to the hospital passed in a blur of early morning traffic and racing thoughts. What kind of situation? Why was I still Eden's emergency contact, when she had other people in her life now, people who apparently mattered more than I did? The questions churned in my mind as I navigated the familiar streets of Montpellier, where Mercy General sat like a white brick fortress against the Vermont hills. The emergency room had the sterile, anxious energy of a place where lives changed in moments. I gave Eden's name to the receptionist, who directed me to a consultation room where Dr. Chen was waiting with a clipboard and the kind of gentle expression that medical professionals perfect for delivering difficult news. "Miss Monroe," she said, standing to shake my hand. "Thank you for coming so quickly. Before you see Eden, I need to explain what happened and what we're dealing with." I sat down in one of the uncomfortable plastic chairs that seemed designed to make difficult conversations even more unbearable. What kind of situation brought her here? Dr. Chen consulted her clipboard, though I suspected she already knew the details by heart. Eden was brought in by ambulance last night after what appears to have been a suicide attempt. She ingested a significant amount of prescription medication along with alcohol. The words hit me like a physical blow. "Suicide attempt?" I repeated, my voice barely above a whisper. "She's stable now," Dr. Chen said quickly. "We were able to treat the overdose successfully, and she's no longer in physical danger. But she's asking to speak with you before she'll agree to speak with our psychiatric team." "I don't understand. Why me? We haven't been getting along lately." Dr. Chen's expression softened. Sometimes when people are at their lowest point, they reach out to the relationships that feel most fundamental to them. Eden has mentioned you several times since she's been awake. She seems to think you're the only person who might understand what she's going through. I followed Dr. Chen through the maze of hospital corridors, past rooms filled with the quiet sounds of people healing or trying to heal. Eden was in a private room at the end of the hall, connected to monitors that beeped softly in the morning. Quiet. She looked smaller than I'd ever seen her, dwarfed by the hospital bed and the institutional blankets that seemed to drain color from everything they touched. "Hi," she said when she saw me, her voice hoarse and fragile. "I wasn't sure you'd come," Of course I came, I said, settling into the chair beside her bed. Eden, what happened? Why didn't you call me? She turned her head away, staring out the window at the hospital parking lot. Because I knew you'd try to talk me out of it. And last night I didn't want to be talked out of it. Out of what? Eden, I don't understand what's going on. She was quiet for so long that I thought she might have fallen asleep. Then she reached into the drawer of her bedside table and pulled out a small plastic hospital bracelet. Not the one she was currently wearing, but an older one, worn and faded. This is from 3 months ago, she said, holding it out to me. March 15th. The day everything changed. I took the bracelet, reading the information printed on the faded plastic. Eden Russell. Date of birth. And then, in smaller print, obstetrics. Miscarriage management. The world stopped spinning. For a moment. Eden, I whispered. You were pregnant? 12 weeks, she said, her voice so quiet I had to lean closer to hear her. I found out in February. I was terrified and excited and completely unprepared, but I was going to have a baby, and then I wasn't. Who? I started to ask, then stopped, because I already knew the answer. Your father, she said, confirming what I'd hoped wasn't true. The affair started in January, Callie. Not March like I told you yesterday. January. And by February, I was pregnant with his child. I stared at the hospital bracelet in my hands, trying to process what she was telling me. You lost the baby in March? Miscarried at 12 weeks. Natural causes, they said. These things happen, they said. But I felt like my body was punishing me for the mess I'd made of everything. She turned to look at me, and I saw tears streaming down her face. I was alone in that hospital room for 6 hours, Callie. 6 hours of losing the only thing that had ever been completely mine. Why didn't you tell me? Why didn't you call? Because I was ashamed. Because I knew you'd hate me for what I'd done. Because I couldn't face the disappointment in your eyes when you realized that your best friend had been lying to you for months about sleeping with your father. The pieces were falling into place now, creating a picture that was somehow both clearer and more complicated than what I'd understood before. The expensive jewelry box, I said. For my birthday. That wasn't from your savings. Eden's laugh was bitter. Your father gave me money after the miscarriage. Said it was for medical expenses, but we both knew it was guilt money. Payment for services rendered and secrets kept. She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. I spent it on that music box because I wanted to give you something beautiful. Something that might make you think of me fondly when you eventually found out the truth about what I'd done. Eden, I know what you're thinking, she said, cutting me off. That I'm trying to manipulate you into feeling sorry for me. That I'm using the miscarriage to excuse the affair. But that's not what this is. I'm trying to explain why I fell apart so completely. Why I couldn't see any way out except... She gestured vaguely at the hospital room, the monitors, the evidence, of her attempt to escape the pain permanently. After I lost the baby, something broke inside me. Not just the grief, though that was overwhelming. It was the realization that I'd traded away everything that mattered. My friendship with you, my relationship with your family, my own self-respect, for a fantasy that was never going to last. Your father was never going to leave your mother, for me. He was never going to build a life with me. I was just a distraction from his own midlife crisis, and I convinced myself it was love, because I needed it to be love. I thought about what she'd said at the lake, about Dad understanding her in ways no one else had. You told me yesterday that he saw who you could be instead of who you've been. I needed to believe that, she said. I needed to believe that someone saw potential in me, that I was worth disrupting a family for. But the truth is, I was just convenient, available, willing to be whatever he needed me to be so I could feel important for a few months. The monitor beside her bed beeped steadily. a mechanical reminder that she was still here, still alive despite her attempts to escape the consequences of her choices. I studied her face, looking for the girl I'd known since childhood, the friend who'd shared my secrets and my dreams. "The affair is still happening," I said. It wasn't a question. Yes, but it's different now. After the miscarriage, it became about comfort rather than passion. We're both damaged people trying to heal each other, but we're just making each other worse. She met my eyes. "I know he's planning to tell you and your mother this weekend. I know he's going to leave her. But Callie, I need you to understand that it's not because he loves me. It's because he's running away from the guilt of what we did, and he thinks starting over with me will somehow make it okay. And you're going along with it?" I was. Until last night, when I realized that I couldn't live with myself anymore. That I'd rather be dead than continue being the person who destroyed your family for a love that was never really love at all. I set the hospital bracelet on her bedside table, where it sat between us like evidence of all the ways people could hurt each other without meaning to. "Eden, you can't undo what happened, but you can stop making it worse." "I know. That's why I wanted to see you, to tell you the truth about everything before your father spins his version of events, to ask you to forgive me, not because I deserve it, but because carrying this much hate will poison you the way it's poisoned me." Dr. Chen appeared in the doorway, clearing her throat softly. "I'm sorry to interrupt, but Eden, the psychiatric team is ready to meet with you now. This is an important part of your treatment." Eden nodded, then turned back to me. "Will you tell your mother? About the baby, I mean. She deserves to know the whole truth about what her husband has been doing." "I'll tell her," I said, though the thought of delivering that information made my stomach clench. "And Callie, when your father tells his version of this story, remember that people in pain don't always tell the truth about their motivations. Sometimes they tell the story that makes them feel less terrible about themselves." I stood to leave, but Eden caught my hand. "I'm sorry," she whispered, "for all of it. For the lies, and the betrayal, and the way I turned your family into collateral damage for my own emotional needs. I'm so sorry." I looked down at her, this woman who had been my closest friend, my sister in everything but blood, now reduced to a broken figure in a hospital bed, asking for forgiveness I wasn't sure I had to give. "I'm sorry too," I said finally, "for not seeing how much pain you were in, for not being the kind of friend you could trust with the truth." "You were exactly the kind of friend I needed," she said. "That's why I couldn't bear to lose you. That's why I kept lying long after the lies stopped protecting anyone." I left her there with Dr. Chen and the psychiatric team, walked through the hospital corridors past other people's crises and healing, and sat in my car in the parking lot for 20 minutes, trying to process what I'd learned. Eden's revelation didn't excuse what she and Dad had done, but it explained it in ways that made their betrayal seem less like calculated cruelty and more like the desperate actions of two people who had lost themselves in their own pain. It didn't change the damage they'd caused, but it changed how I understood their motivations. By the time I drove home, I knew that nothing would ever be simple again. The story I'd been telling myself about my father's selfishness and Eden's betrayal was true, but it wasn't the whole truth. The whole truth was messier, more tragic, and somehow harder to bear than the clean narrative of good people versus bad people. Real life, I was learning, didn't offer the clear moral lines that made healing straightforward. Sometimes the people who hurt you most were also the people who were hurting most themselves. I drove straight to chapter and verse after leaving the hospital, needing the sanctuary of books and the steady presence of Julian more than I needed to go home and pretend everything was normal. Mrs. Hendricks took one look at my face and disappeared into the back office, muttering something about inventory that needed urgent attention in a place far from the front desk. Julian was shelving new arrivals in the fiction section, but he set down his stack of books the moment he saw me. What happened? I told him everything. Eden's suicide attempt, the revelation about the pregnancy and miscarriage, the hospital bracelet that had rewritten everything I thought I understood about the past 3 months. Julian listened without interrupting, his expression growing more grave with each detail. Jesus, Callie, he said when I finished. How are you holding up? I don't know, I said honestly. Yesterday I was angry about a straightforward betrayal. Today I'm trying to figure out how to be angry at someone who's been grieving a dead baby while destroying my family. It's like every time I think I understand what's happening, the story changes. Julian pulled 2 chairs together in the quiet corner where we kept the poetry section. The story hasn't changed, he said gently. You're just seeing more of it. People are complicated, Callie. They can be victims and perpetrators at the same time. Eden's pain doesn't excuse what she did, but it explains it in ways that make simple judgments impossible. My father still doesn't know I know, I said. He's planning some kind of family meeting this weekend to tell us the truth. How do I sit through that performance when I already know he's been lying about everything? Maybe you don't, Julian said. Maybe it's time to take control of your own story, instead of waiting for other people to decide when and how to tell you the truth. The idea was both terrifying and liberating. I'd spent my entire life being the good daughter, the understanding friend, the person who adapted to other people's needs and schedules. The thought of confronting Dad on my terms, forcing him to be honest instead of allowing him to manage the narrative, felt like stepping off a cliff. I wouldn't even know where to start, I said. Start with what you need, Julian said. Not what he needs to feel better about himself, or what Eden needs to heal, or what your mother needs to preserve her dignity. What do you need in order to move forward? I thought about it for a long moment, listening to the familiar sounds of the bookstore. The soft music Mrs. Hendricks played to create ambiance, the whisper of pages turning as a customer browsed the travel section, the distant hum of the coffee machine in the back office. I need to understand why, I said finally. Not the surface reasons or the justifications, but the real why. I need to know if any of what I believed about our family was true, or if it was all just a performance designed to keep me from seeing who they really were. Those are good questions, Julian said. Hard ones, but good ones. I also need them to acknowledge what they've taken from me, I continued, the words coming faster as I found my voice. Not just the specific betrayal, but the way they've made me question everything I thought I knew about love and trust, and whether the people who claim to care about you can be relied upon to tell you the truth. Julian nodded. And after you get those answers? I don't know. I keep thinking I should know what comes next, but I honestly have no idea how to rebuild a life when the foundation has been dynamited. Maybe that's okay, he said. Maybe not knowing is part of the process. Maybe you get to build something completely new instead of trying to repair what was broken. That afternoon, while Julian handled customers and Mrs. Hendricks continued her strategic disappearance, I sat in the back office and did something I hadn't done in months. I wrote. Not the careful, self-conscious fiction I'd been struggling with, but raw, honest prose about betrayal and trust, and the way family secrets could rewrite your entire understanding of your own life. The words poured out of me like water from a broken dam. 3,000 words about a young woman discovering that the people she'd trusted most had been living entirely different lives than the ones she'd believed in. It wasn't a story, exactly. More like an excavation, digging through layers of assumptions and self-deception to find something real underneath. When I finished, I read it over and realized I'd written something true in a way that my previous attempts at fiction had never been. It was messy and painful, and probably too personal to show anyone, but it was honest. For the first time in months, I'd written something that mattered. Can I read it? Julian asked when I emerged from the back office with pages covered in handwritten text. I hesitated. The piece was raw, unedited, full of pain I hadn't known how to articulate until it appeared on paper. But Julian had earned the right to see me at my most vulnerable, and something about his steady presence made sharing feel safe. He read in silence while I organized returns, and tried not to watch his face for reactions. When he finished, he looked up at me with something like awe. "Callie, this is extraordinary," he said. "It's brutal and beautiful and completely authentic. You should submit this somewhere." "It's too personal," I protested. "Too much like therapy disguised as literature." "The best writing often is," he said. "Besides, there are people out there, going through similar experiences who need to read something this honest about family betrayal. You could help them feel less alone." The idea of turning my pain into something that might help other people felt both presumptuous and appealing. I'd always believed that writing should serve some purpose beyond self-expression, but I'd never considered that my own experiences might be universal enough to resonate with strangers. "There's a literary magazine called Compass that publishes essays about family and identity," Julian said. "Mrs. Hendricks has a copy of their submission guidelines somewhere. You should consider sending this to them." That evening, I went home to find Mom in the kitchen preparing dinner with unusual intensity, chopping vegetables with the focused precision of someone trying to channel anxiety into productive activity. Dad was still at work, or claiming to be at work, which gave me the opportunity I'd been both dreading and needing. "Mom," I said, settling at the kitchen table. "We need to talk." She looked up from the onion she was dicing, taking in my expression. "This is about your father, isn't it?" "You already know," I said. It wasn't a question. "I've suspected for weeks," she said, setting down her knife. "The late nights, the secretive phone calls, the way he's been avoiding intimacy and conversation. I'm not naive, Callie. I know what a cheating husband looks like." "Do you know who?" Mom's composure cracked slightly. I hoped I was wrong about that part. I told her about Eden, not just the affair, but the pregnancy and miscarriage, the suicide attempt, the complex web of pain and poor choices that had led to this moment. Mom listened without interrupting, her hands gripping the edge of the counter, as if she needed something solid to hold on to. "A baby," she said when I finished. "She was carrying his baby." "I'm sorry," I said. "I know this makes everything more complicated." "Actually, it makes things clearer," Mom said, surprising me. "I've been trying to understand why your father would risk everything we built together for what seemed like a meaningless affair. But grief and guilt and the fantasy of starting over, those are powerful motivators." "Are you going to confront him?" "We're going to confront him," she said firmly. "Together, before he has a chance to control the narrative or make this about his needs instead of the damage he's caused." "When?" "Tonight. When he comes home from wherever he's actually been, spending his evenings." Mom resumed chopping vegetables, but her movements were sharper now, more purposeful. "I've spent 25 years being the understanding wife who didn't ask uncomfortable questions. I'm done with that version of myself." As if summoned by our conversation, we heard Dad's car in the driveway. Mom and I looked at each other, and I saw something fierce and determined in her eyes that I'd never seen before. "Are you ready for this?" she asked. I thought about Eden in her hospital bed, about Julian's steady support, about the raw honesty I'd managed to capture in my writing that afternoon. I thought about the woman I wanted to become versus the girl I'd been. Someone who demanded truth instead of accepting comfortable lies. "I'm ready," I said, and meant it. Dad walked through the front door at 8:15, carrying his laptop bag and wearing the slightly guilty expression that had become his default over the past few weeks. He called out his usual greeting, "I'm home," but stopped short when he saw Mom and me sitting at the kitchen table, waiting for him with the kind of focused attention that suggested this wasn't going to be a normal evening. "What's this?" he asked, attempting lightness. "Family meeting?" "Sit down, Richard," Mom said, her voice carrying an authority I'd rarely heard before. "We need to talk." Dad's eyes darted between us, clearly trying to assess the situation. "Can I at least grab a beer first? It's been a long day." "It's about to get longer," I said. "Sit down, Dad." He settled into his usual chair at the head of the table, but his posture was defensive, like a man preparing for an attack he couldn't yet see coming. "Okay," he said carefully. "What's going on?" Mom and I had agreed that I would start, that hearing the truth from his daughter might shock him into honesty faster than accusations from his wife. I took a deep breath and looked directly into his eyes. "I know about Eden," I said simply. The color drained from Dad's face. "Callie, I know about the affair. I know it started in January, not March. I know about the pregnancy and the miscarriage. I know about the money you gave her afterward. And I know you've been planning some kind of grand revelation this weekend, where you tell us you're leaving Mom to be with her." Dad's mouth opened and closed without sound, like a fish pulled from water. When he finally found his voice, it came out as barely a whisper. "How long have you known?" "I followed you to her apartment on my birthday," I said. "After that phone call you tried to hide, after you lied about it being work-related. I've been watching our family fall apart for days while you planned your exit strategy." "And I've known longer than that," Mom added, her voice steady despite the tears now streaming down her face. "I've been waiting for you to find the courage to tell me the truth, instead of making me live with suspicions and half-lies." Dad buried his face in his hands. "I never wanted either of you to be hurt by this. I kept trying to find a way to handle it that wouldn't destroy everything." "By having an affair with my best friend?" I asked, my voice rising. "By getting her pregnant and then paying her off when she lost the baby? By continuing to lie to us every single day while you figured out how to manage the destruction you'd caused?" "It wasn't supposed to happen," he said, looking up at us with eyes that were red-rimmed and desperate. "Eden came to me for advice, for help with some things, and somewhere along the way it became something else. Something I never intended." "What kind of help?" Mom asked, though her tone suggested she didn't really want to know. Dad was quiet for a long moment. "She was struggling financially. Behind on rent, had some medical bills from when she got sick last winter. I helped her out, and she was so grateful, so vulnerable. One thing led to another. You took advantage of a young woman who was in financial distress," Mom said, her voice deadly quiet. "A woman who's been like a daughter to us, a woman who trusted you to be the father figure she never had." "It wasn't like that," Dad protested. "The feelings were real, on both sides. Yes, it started wrong, but it became something genuine, something neither of us expected." "Genuine enough to get her pregnant," I said. "Genuine enough to let her go through a miscarriage alone while you maintained your double life." "She didn't want me there," he said. "She said it would be too risky, that people might see us together and figure out what was happening. Or maybe she realized that you were never going to choose her over your reputation," I said. "Maybe she understood that she was expendable, in ways that your public image wasn't." Dad flinched as if I'd slapped him. "That's not true. I love her." "No," Mom said firmly. "You love the way she makes you feel about yourself. You love having someone young and grateful look at you like you're a hero instead of a middle-aged man having a crisis. But you don't love her enough to have been honest about your intentions from the beginning." "I'm leaving," Dad said suddenly, as if the words had been torn from him. "I've already talked to a lawyer about the divorce. I was going to tell you both this weekend, but since you already know..." "Where are you going?" I asked. "I rented a place by the lake, the cabin behind the Hendersons' property. I thought Eden and I could figure things out there, away from all the complications." The irony wasn't lost on me. Dad was planning to start his new life in the same lake area where Eden and I had shared our most important conversations, where she'd confessed her betrayal just days ago. "And you think she's going to go with you?" I asked. "Even after trying to kill herself because she couldn't live with what you two had done?" Dad's head snapped up. What are you talking about? I realized he didn't know about Eden's suicide attempt, that she'd been alone in that hospital room just as she'd been alone during her miscarriage. She overdosed 2 nights ago, Dad. Pills and alcohol. She's in the psychiatric ward at Mercy General. Oh God, he whispered. Is she? She's alive, I said. But she's also done with this fantasy you've been living in. She told me the truth about everything. The timeline, the pregnancy, the money, the way you've both been using each other to avoid dealing with your real problems. Dad stood up abruptly, pacing to the window that looked out over Mom's garden. I have to go see her. I have to make sure she's okay. No, I said firmly. You don't get to play the concerned lover now. You don't get to rush to her rescue after spending months making sure she felt alone and disposable. She's not disposable, he said, turning back to face us. I know I've handled this badly, but the feelings are real. I want to build a life with her. What you want, Mom said, standing up with the kind of dignity that comes from finally accepting an unbearable truth, is to escape the consequences of your choices by running away with someone who's too damaged to see clearly that you're bad for her. That's not... It is exactly that, I interrupted. Eden told me herself that what you have isn't love. It's 2 broken people trying to fix each other and making everything worse instead. Dad looked back and forth between us, and I saw the exact moment when he realized that his carefully constructed exit strategy was crumbling. Whatever version of this conversation he'd imagined, it wasn't this one. It wasn't being confronted by 2 women who already knew the truth and weren't interested in being managed or manipulated. What do you want from me? He asked finally. I want you to leave, Mom said simply. Tonight. Go to your lake house and figure out who you actually are when you're not pretending to be the man we thought we knew. And I want you to leave Eden alone, I added. She's trying to heal from the damage you've both caused. She doesn't need you showing up with more promises you can't keep and more fantasies about starting over. You're my daughter, Dad said, his voice breaking. You're my family. I can't just walk away from that. You already did, I said. The moment you chose her over us. The moment you decided that what you wanted was more important than what we needed. The moment you started, lying to us every single day. Dad looked at Mom, perhaps hoping for some softness, some opening for negotiation. But Mom's expression was resolute, in a way I'd never seen before. Take what you need tonight, she said. We'll figure out the legal details later. But I want you gone before morning. He stood there for another long moment, looking around the kitchen that had been the center of our family life for so many years. I wondered if he was remembering Sunday morning pancakes or homework help at the same table, if he was finally understanding everything he was giving up. I'm sorry, he said finally. I never wanted to hurt either of you. But you did hurt us, I said, and now you have to live with that. We all do. Dad walked upstairs to pack, and Mom and I sat in the kitchen listening to his footsteps above us. The sound of drawers opening and closing, the strange domestic details of a life being dismantled. Are you okay? I asked her. I will be, she said. For the first time in months, I know exactly where I stand. That's something. When Dad came back downstairs with a suitcase and a few boxes, he paused in the doorway. The key to the lake house, he said, setting it on the counter. In case you ever want to talk, or if Eden needs somewhere quiet to recover. After he left, Mom and I sat in the sudden silence of our house, processing what had just happened. It felt both anticlimactic and seismic, the end of our family as we'd known it, but also the beginning of something more honest. What now? I asked. Mom picked up the lake house key, turning it over in her palm. Now we figure out how to build lives that belong to us instead of lives that exist to serve other people's needs. I looked at the key too, thinking about the cabin where Dad had planned to start over with Eden, where he'd imagined building something new on the ruins of everything he'd destroyed. Instead, maybe it could be where I went to write the novel that was taking shape in my mind, the story of a young woman learning to trust her own voice after discovering that the people she'd trusted most had been lying all along. "I think I'd like to use that cabin," I said. "Not for him, and not for Eden. For me. To write." Mom smiled, the first genuine smile I'd seen from her in weeks. "I think that's exactly what you should do." 6 months later, I'm sitting in my own apartment, a small one-bedroom above the bakery on Main Street, watching the first snow of winter dust the streets of Millbrook. The lake house served its purpose through the summer, giving me the solitude I needed to write and think, and slowly piece together who I wanted to be when I wasn't defined by other people's choices. Compass magazine published my essay about family betrayal in their fall issue. The response was overwhelming. Letters from readers who recognized their own stories in mine, invitations to speak at writing workshops, and an agent who wants to discuss my novel in progress about a young woman rebuilding her life after discovering that trust is earned, not inherited. Mom sold the house on Maple Street and bought a small studio downtown where she's teaching art classes and working on her own paintings again. We have dinner together twice a week. Two women who learned that surviving betrayal sometimes means discovering who you were before the people who hurt you entered your life. Eden moved to Boston after completing her treatment program. She sends postcards occasionally, brief messages that say she's working as a stylist and taking classes at night. She's learning to build a life that belongs to her instead of existing as an extension of someone else's needs. I hope she finds what she's looking for. Dad calls sometimes, usually late at night when he's been drinking. I don't answer. Julian says forgiveness is a process, not a destination, and I'm not ready for that journey yet. Maybe someday. Julian and I are taking things slowly, building something based on honesty instead of convenience. He makes me laugh, listens when I need to talk, and never tries to fix problems that aren't his to solve. It's the first relationship I've had that feels like a choice rather than a habit. Tonight, I'm going to keep writing. The story isn't finished yet, but for the first time in my life, I'm not afraid of where it might lead. Up next, we have 2 more incredible stories that are waiting for you. Just click the image you want to watch, and it will take you there. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to subscribe. It would mean a lot.